The universe is old. Older than any living thing can truly understand. Stars are born, burn for millions of years, and then die quietly in the dark. Planets form, crack, freeze, and crumble. Entire civilizations rise up, build great things, and then disappear, leaving nothing behind but dust and silence. Most of the time, nobody even notices when a species is gone. But there are some names that the galaxy never forgets. Some species leave a mark so deep, so strange, so impossible to explain, that even after thousands of years, other beings still whisper about them in the dark. Humanity was one of those species. The research ship Pale Drift moved slowly through the outer edge of a dead solar system. It was a small ship, built for quiet work, not for war. Its hull was covered in old scan marks and repair patches. It had seen better days. So had its crew. There were 5 of them on board. Vorik was the lead archaeologist. She was tall, gray-skinned, and had 3 sets of eyes, 2 for seeing in darkness, 1 for reading fine detail. She had spent 40 years digging up dead worlds. She had found old temples, broken weapons, cracked bones, and forgotten gods. She had seen things that made young researchers cry and old ones go quiet. But she had never come to this system before. Nobody came here if they could help it. This was the Soul System. The place where the humans used to live. Vorik stood at the front window of the ship and looked out at the pale, frozen star in the distance. It was dying, slowly, peacefully, like an old fire running out of wood. Around it, the planet still turned. Still cold. Still empty. Still carrying the silence of 10,000 years. Behind her, the rest of the crew moved through their morning routines. Doss, the ship's engineer, was fixing a broken panel near the back wall, again. He was always fixing something. Taith, the youngest researcher on the team, was eating a small meal and reading old files on her screen. The other 2 crew members, Oln and Sev, were running the morning scanner checks without looking up. Nobody was talking. That happened a lot when you got close to this system. There was something about this place that made people go quiet. Scanner is picking up something, Oln said. His voice was flat, like he was reading numbers off a screen, which he was. Vorik did not turn around. What kind of something? Metal. Deep. About 60 meters below the surface of the 4th moon. Now she turned around. The 4th moon. Vorik knew it. Every archaeologist knew it. For years, there had been old stories passed around at conferences and in late-night research rooms, stories that said the humans had left something behind. Not wreckage. Not bones. Something they had built on purpose. Something they had sealed and buried and left there for a reason. Most serious scientists called those stories nonsense. Vorik had always kept quiet when those conversations came up. Because she was not so sure. She walked over to Oln's station and looked at his screen. The scanner signal was small but clear, a tight, organized shape buried under layers of ice and rock. Not natural. Not random. It had straight edges. Perfect angles. The kind of shape that only gets made by hands that know what they are doing. How old? She asked. Oln ran the numbers twice. Then a 3rd time. He looked up at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. 10,000 years, he said. Give or take a century. The room went still. Even Doss stopped fixing his panel. 10,000 years. That was not just old. That was ancient. That was before the current Galactic Council existed. Before most of the known trade routes were mapped. Before half the living species in the universe had even discovered fire. That was from the time when humans were still alive. Taith put down her food. Could be natural formation, she said. But her voice was not convincing. She did not even convince herself. It is not natural, Vorik said. She was already walking toward the navigation chair. Set course for the moon. Slow approach. Full scans the entire way in. You think it is real? Doss asked. You think the stories are actually? I think, Vorik said carefully, that we are going to go and look. That is all. But her hands, as she pulled up the navigation screen, were not steady. Because she had read everything ever written about the humans. Every fragment. Every second-hand account. Every translated piece of text that other species had collected over the centuries. She knew what they had been. She knew what they had done. She knew that they had been small and soft and fragile in ways that should have made survival impossible, and yet they had fought, and built, and loved, and pushed forward through things that would have ended any other species a dozen times over. And now, somewhere under all that ice and rock and silence, they had left something. They had left it here, in this frozen moon, at the edge of a dying star system, in the middle of nowhere. And they had left it on purpose. That was the part that made Vorik's hands shake. Because the humans never did anything without a reason. The pale drift turned slowly toward the moon and began its descent. Below them, in the dark and the cold, something was waiting. Something that had been waiting for a very long time. The moon had no name. That was the first thing Vorik noticed when she checked the old star maps. Every planet in this system had a name, names the humans had given them thousands of years ago. But this moon, the fourth one, the small frozen one that sat quietly in the shadow of a gas giant, it had no name. Just a number. Just a code in an old catalog that nobody had updated in centuries. The humans had left it nameless on purpose. That thought sat in Vorik's chest like a stone the entire way down. The landing was rough. The moon's surface was uneven, cracked and buckled from centuries of temperature shifts, covered in a thick layer of blue-gray ice that crunched and splintered under the weight of the ship. When the engines finally cut off, the silence outside was total. No wind. No sound. Nothing moving in any direction as far as the scanners could reach. Just ice. Just rock. Just cold. Doss looked out the side window and made a low sound in his throat. Lovely place, he said. Really warm. Very welcoming. Nobody laughed. Not even him. They put on their suits and stepped outside one by one. The cold hit immediately, even through the thermal layers, a deep, old cold that felt like it had been sitting here for thousands of years and had no plans to leave. The sky above them was dark and full of stars. The gas giant hung huge and orange on the horizon, throwing just enough light to see by. Vorik checked her scanner. The signal was still there, steady, clean, 60 meters down. This way, she said, they walked. The surface of the moon was not completely flat. There were low ridges and shallow valleys carved by old ice movements, and the crew moved carefully between them, watching their footing. Taith kept her scanner running the whole time, pulling readings every few steps. Ohm carried the heavy equipment pack without complaining. Sev walked at the back, saying nothing, watching everything. After about 20 minutes of walking, Taith stopped. Here, she said. Vorik looked at the ground. It looked the same as everywhere else, flat ice, a few cracks, nothing unusual. But her scanner agreed with Taith's. The structure was directly below them. 60 meters straight down, sitting in a pocket of rock that the ice had never fully filled. How do we get in? Doss asked. Vorik walked slowly in a wide circle around the spot, watching her scanner. After 2 full circles, she stopped. There was a faint difference in the ice here, a small area about 2 meters across where the surface was slightly smoother than the rest. Like something underneath had kept it from cracking the same way. She knelt down and pressed her gloved hand flat against the ice. Under her palm, very faintly, she felt something. A vibration. Tiny. Regular. Like a pulse. She stood up slowly. It is still running, she said. The crew stared at her. "The structure," she said. "Whatever is down there, it still has power." They drilled carefully. Dawes ran the drill while the others stood back, and the ice came up in long pale cores that Taith stacked neatly to one side out of habit, even though nobody was going to study them. The drill bit through the ice easily at first, then slowed as it hit older, harder layers. After 40 minutes, it broke through into open space below. Cold air, or something like air, sighed up through the hole. Not the dead cold of the moon's surface. This was different. Stale and old, but not quite frozen. Like a room that had been sealed for a very long time but had never fully died. Vorik shone a light down through the hole. She could see a ceiling below. Metal. Dark and perfectly smooth. "We need a bigger opening," she said. Dawes nodded and widened the drill path without being asked. He was good at knowing what was needed before anyone said it. It was why Vorik had worked with him for 15 years. When the opening was wide enough, they lowered a rope and Vorik went down first. She dropped through the ice, through the short gap of cold open air, and landed with a soft sound on a hard metal floor. She turned on her full light. And she stopped breathing for a moment. The room was large. Larger than it had any right to be, given how deep they were under the surface. The walls were the same dark metal as the ceiling, smooth, unmarked, built with a care and precision that made Vorik's chest tighten just looking at it. Along one wall, rows of shelves held small black objects, each one exactly the same size, each one perfectly placed. Along the opposite wall, one large screen. Dark and silent. And in the very center of the room, set into the floor, a single symbol pressed into the metal in faint raised lines. Vorik crouched down and looked at it closely. She had seen that symbol before. In old books. In research files. In the rare surviving pieces of human text that had made their way into galactic archives over the centuries. It was the human symbol for Earth. Their home world. The world that was now just rock and memory. The others dropped down one by one behind her. She heard Taith make a small, sharp sound when she saw the room. She heard Dawes go very quiet. Then Owen said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Vorik." The screen. She turned around. The screen on the far wall was no longer dark. It was on. And it was waiting. Nobody moved. That was the first thing. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even shifted their weight from one foot to the other. 5 trained researchers, people who had spent their entire careers staying calm in strange places, stood completely still and stared at a screen that had no right to be working. It had been 10,000 years. 10,000 years of cold and dark and silence. 10,000 years of a dead moon sitting in a dead system with no one to look after it, no one to maintain it, no power source that any known technology could sustain for that long. And yet the screen was on. A soft white glow filled the room. Not bright, gentle, like early morning light through thin clouds. It lit the dark metal walls and made the rows of small black objects on the shelves cast long thin shadows across the floor. Vorik straightened up slowly from where she had been crouching over the Earth symbol. She took one step toward the screen, then stopped. Because something was happening on it. It started as a small point of light in the center of the screen. Then it grew, slowly, steadily, spreading outward until the whole screen was filled with a soft, even glow. Then, in the middle of that glow, shapes began to appear. Not random shapes. Not patterns or symbols or data charts. A face. A human face. Vorik had seen images of humans before. Old photographs in research files. Sketched reconstructions in history books. Tiny blurry recordings that other species had kept from the years before the humans disappeared. But those were always flat and faded and lifeless, images of something that used to exist. This was different. This human on the screen looked real. Fully real. She was sitting at a plain desk in a plain room, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She had dark brown skin and short gray hair and 2 eyes, just 2, small and dark and very steady. She was old. Not fragile old, but the kind of old that comes from carrying heavy things for a very long time. She looked directly at the camera. She looked, somehow, directly at them. And then she spoke. The language was human, a flowing, layered sound that none of them knew. But before any of them could reach for a translation device, the screen itself did the work. Soft text appeared along the bottom, letter by letter, in clean Galactic Standard script. The Vault had already thought of this. The Vault had already prepared. The text read: "My name is Sarah. I was the last elected leader of the human species. If you are watching this recording, then we are gone. And you deserve to know the truth about who we were." Taith made a sound, not quite a word, just a small exhale that held everything in it. Surprise and sadness and something else. Something that had no easy name. Vorik said nothing. She just watched. Sarah did not rush. She spoke slowly and clearly, like someone who had practiced these words many times and wanted to make absolutely sure they came out right. She explained that the Vault held hundreds of hours of recordings, history, science, music, stories, personal letters, maps, and more. She said that every file was labeled in Galactic Standard because the humans had spent years studying the most widely spoken language in the known galaxy, just so that whoever found this place would be able to understand it. They had done all of that while they were dying. While the sickness was spreading and the hospitals were full and the cities were going quiet one by one, they had sat down and translated their entire history into a language for strangers. For people they had never met. For species they had only ever observed from a distance. Because they wanted to be remembered correctly. Not as a footnote. Not as a rumor. Not as the strange little species from the third planet of a small star. But as something real. Something true. Vorik felt something move in her chest that she did not have a clean word for. Sarah's first recording was only 12 minutes long. When it ended, the screen held steady on a simple menu, hundreds of files, all neatly organized, all labeled in Galactic Standard. History. Culture. Science. Art. Personal records. And at the very top of the list, marked differently from all the others, in slightly larger text, with a small symbol beside it that looked like an open hand, one file simply labeled. Start here. Owen pointed at it. That one, he said. Yes, Vorik said. She reached out and pressed the screen. The file that opened was not another recording of Sarah. It was something older, a collection of short clips stitched together from different times and different places. Humans of all different sizes and colors and ages, each one sitting or standing in front of a camera, each one saying a few words directly to the lens. Some of them were smiling. Some were not. Some looked tired. Some looked frightened. But every single one of them looked straight at the camera with the same expression underneath everything else. Steady. Calm. Unafraid. Like they had made peace with what was coming and simply wanted to say a few last things before it arrived. The first person in the clip was a very old man with white hair and large weathered hands. He looked at the camera for a moment without speaking, like he was choosing his words carefully. Then he said, and the translation appeared soft and clear at the bottom of the screen. We were not perfect. Not even close. But we never stopped trying. Please remember that part. The clip moved to the next person. A young woman, maybe 20 years old, with bright eyes and a tired smile. We loved this universe, she said. Even when it was hard. Even when it hurt. We loved it anyway. Then a child, small, maybe 6 or 7, missing a front tooth. I hope you have dogs where you come from, the child said seriously. Dogs are really important. Taith laughed. It came out before she could stop it, a short, wet laugh that was more than half a sob. She pressed her hand over her mouth and looked away. Nobody said anything about it. The recordings continued. The crew of the Pale Drift sat on the cold metal floor of a vault on an unnamed moon and watched a dead civilization introduce itself, one face at a time. Outside, the gas giant turned slowly on the horizon. Inside, the humans kept talking. They had so much to say. And for the first time in 10,000 years, someone was finally there to listen. It started with a number. Not a name. Not a dramatic announcement. Not a flashing warning across the screen. Just a number, plain and clean and sitting quietly in the corner of a file that Taith almost skipped over entirely because the label seemed boring. The label said, Conflict Record 7, External Involvement. Taith had been going through the history files one by one, cataloging them in order, the way she had been trained to do. She was good at this work, careful, patient, methodical. She did not jump ahead. She did not skip around. She went in order and she noted everything down and she stayed calm. But when she opened Conflict Record 7 and saw the number at the top of the document, she stopped being calm. She stopped being anything for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, Vorak. Vorak was on the other side of the vault, studying the shelves of black discs more closely. Each disc, she had discovered, was a self-contained data unit, a single complete record, sealed and preserved and still perfectly readable after 10,000 years. The engineering alone was extraordinary. No known current technology could build something that lasted this long without maintenance. She had been thinking about that. About what it meant that the humans had built this so well. About what kind of people spend their final years making sure their memory survives perfectly, long after they are gone. She was still thinking about it when Taith called her name. The tone of Taith's voice made her cross the room immediately. She looked at the screen over Taith's shoulder. The number at the top of the document was a casualty figure. A count of lives lost in a specific conflict during a specific period of human history, a conflict that Vorak recognized immediately because every species in the known galaxy recognized it. The Unification Conflict. It was the largest war in recorded galactic history. It had started 4,000 years ago and lasted nearly 2 centuries. Two massive alliances, the Outer Reach Coalition and the Central Meridian Compact, had fought each other across dozens of star systems over resources, territory, and power. The destruction had been enormous. Entire planets had been stripped bare. Species had been displaced and scattered. It had ended, eventually, with a peace agreement that most historians described as a miracle, two sides so exhausted and broken that they simply stopped. That was the official story. That was the story every school in the galaxy taught. Every history file confirmed it. Every record agreed. But the human document on the screen told a completely different story. Vorak read slowly. Then she read it again. Then she straightened up and looked at the wall for a long moment without speaking. Read it out loud, Owen said from across the room. He had heard Taith's tone too and had come over quietly. Vorak read. According to the human records, the unification conflict had not ended because the two sides got tired. It had not ended because of diplomacy or negotiation or any kind of natural exhaustion. It had been heading towards something far worse, a final strike. A weapon. Something the human documents called a star killer, a device that one side had built in secret and was weeks away from using when the humans found out about it. The humans had been watching the war from a distance for decades. They had no alliance with either side. They were too small, too far away, too unknown to matter to either the coalition or the compact. They were, for all practical purposes, invisible. Which was exactly why they were able to do what they did. Over a period of 18 months, working in complete silence and total secrecy, the humans had sent 14 ships deep into enemy territory. Not warships, small, fast, unremarkable vessels that looked like traders and scouts and survey craft. The kind of ships nobody looks at twice. Those ships had located the star killer. Tracked its construction. mapped its position. And then, on a single night that the human records called the Long Silence, 14 human crews had destroyed it. Not one of those crews came home. All 112 humans on those 14 ships had known, before they left, that they were not coming back. The mission required getting close enough to guarantee the destruction of the weapon. There was no safe distance for that. There was no version of the plan where they survived. They had gone anyway. Every single one of them had gone anyway. The vault was completely silent. Dawes had stopped what he was doing somewhere in the middle of Vorek's reading and had not moved since. Sev was standing very still near the door. Tate had her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, even though the vault was warmer than the surface outside. Olm spoke first. His voice was careful and slow, like he was testing whether the words were real before he let them out fully. So the peace agreement, he said. The miracle ending. The two sides simply stopping. Was not a miracle, Vorek said. They stopped because the weapon was gone. Because 112 humans no one had ever heard of went out in the dark and made sure it was gone. Olm was quiet for a moment. And nobody knew, he said. Nobody knew, Vorek said. She turned back to the screen. There is more, she said. There was always more. The human records were thorough in a way that was almost painful. They did not just record what happened, they recorded why. They recorded the meetings where the decision was made. The arguments for and against. The names of every person who voted. The letters that the crew members of those 14 ships had written to their families before they left. Vorek read one of those letters. It was from a young human named Davin, 23 years old, according to the file. He had written to his mother the night before departure. The letter was short. Most of it was ordinary. He talked about a meal he wished he could eat one more time, a place back home he hoped she would visit, a joke between the two of them that made no sense out of context but clearly meant something. At the end he wrote, I am not afraid. I want you to know that. I am not afraid because I know what happens if we don't go. And I would rather go than know that I could have stopped it and didn't. That is just how I am made. That is just how we all are made, I think. Look after yourself. I love you more than any word I know. Vorek stopped reading. She set the screen down carefully, stood up straight, and walked to the far corner of the vault. She stood there with her back to the others for almost a full minute. Nobody followed her. Nobody spoke. They understood. When she came back, her face was composed again. Her hands were steady. She was Vorek, 40 years of fieldwork, 100 dead worlds, unshakable. Almost unshakable. There is a file after this one, she said. It is labeled differently from the rest. It is not a history record. It is not a conflict document. She looked at the screen. It is a letter, she said. Written by Sarah. Addressed to, and this is the exact translation, whoever is kind enough to come. The crew looked at each other. Taith uncrossed her arms. Dawes stepped forward. Olm moved closer to the screen. And Vorek pressed play. Sarah looked older in this recording. It was the first thing Vorek noticed. In the first recording, the introduction, the calm explanation of what the vault contained, Sarah had looked tired but strong. Like someone carrying a heavy load who had learned, over many years, to carry it without showing the weight. But in this recording she looked different. Not broken. Not afraid. Just, smaller, somehow. Like something inside her had finally been allowed to rest. Like she had finished the last item on a very long list and had sat down for the first time in years and let herself simply be an old woman in a quiet room. She was wearing plain clothes. No formal jacket. No symbols of office. Just a simple dark shirt and her gray hair and her two steady eyes looking directly at the camera. She folded her hands on the desk in front of her. She took one slow breath. And she began. I do not know who you are, the translation read across the bottom of the screen. I do not know what you look like, or how many of you there are, or how long it took you to find this place. Maybe 100 years. Maybe 10,000. It does not matter. What matters is that you came. And that tells me something important about you already. She paused. Not because she had forgotten what to say, it was clear she knew exactly what she wanted to say. She paused because she was choosing to. Because she wanted the next words to land properly. It tells me you are curious. It tells me you care about things that came before you. It tells me that somewhere inside you, there is something that reaches toward the unknown instead of turning away from it. We had that too. It was one of the best things about us. In the vault, nobody moved. Dawes had sat down cross-legged on the floor at some point without anyone noticing. Taith was standing very still with her hands at her sides. Ohm leaned against the wall with his arms folded, not because he was being casual but because he needed something solid behind him. Vorik stood directly in front of the screen. She did not blink. Sarah talked about the sickness the way someone talks about a long storm that has finally passed, with a kind of flat, clear honesty that had no room left in it for anger or self-pity. She said it had come quietly, the way the worst things always do. A small number of cases at first. Then more. Then many more. Then too many to count. Their best scientists had worked without stopping for years. Their best doctors had tried everything known and then invented new things to try. Their governments had cooperated in ways they never had before, setting aside old arguments and old wounds to face something bigger than any disagreement between them. It had not been enough. I want you to understand something, Sarah said. We did not give up. I need you to know that. Every single day, until the very last day, there were humans who got up in the morning and went back to work trying to find an answer. That is who we were. We were the kind of people who keep trying even when the numbers are bad. Even when the hope is small. Even when the sensible thing would be to stop. She looked down at her hands for a moment. We were never very good at stopping. Then she talked about the things they loved. This part was not in the history files. It was not in the conflict records or the science archives or the carefully organized data disks on the shelves. This part was just Sarah, sitting in her quiet room, talking about the ordinary things that her species had filled their lives with. She talked about food, the extraordinary variety of it, the way humans had built entire cultures around the act of cooking and eating together. She described the smell of bread baking in an oven, the sound of oil heating in a pan, the feeling of sitting around a table with people you loved and eating something warm. She talked about music. She said humans had made music out of almost anything, stretched strings, hollow tubes, their own voices, pieces of wood struck together. She said that music was one of the few things that could make a human cry and smile at the same time, and that they had never fully understood why, but they had never stopped making it either. She talked about children. The way small humans learn things, not carefully or efficiently, but wildly and fearlessly, throwing themselves at the world with no concern for failure. She said that watching a child learn something new was one of the purest things a human could experience. She said it reminded them, every time, that the world was still full of things worth discovering. She talked about mountains. About standing at the top of a high place and looking out at the distance and feeling, for just a moment, both very small and very alive at the same time. Taith was crying. She was not trying to hide it. Tears moved quietly down her face and she let them, because stopping them would have required energy she did not have and would not have been honest anyway. Dawes had his head bowed. His large engineer's hands rested on his knees and he was very still, the stillest Vorik had ever seen him, in 15 years of working together. Even Sev, quiet, unreadable Sev, who Vorik had once seen walk calmly through a collapsing tunnel without changing his expression, had his eyes closed and his jaw tight. Vorik did not look at any of them. She kept her eyes on Sarah. Near the end of the letter, Sarah's voice shifted. Just slightly. Something came into it that had not been there before, not sadness, not quite. Something gentler than sadness. Something that sat closer to gratitude. We had a word, she said. A human word that does not translate perfectly into any other language we ever encountered. The closest meaning is something like, the warmth of being known. The feeling of being truly seen by another person and not found lacking. We spent a great deal of our lives looking for that feeling. In each other. In art. In faith. In the stars above us on clear nights. She looked at the camera. I hope you have a word for it too. I hope you have felt it. I hope, wherever you are and whatever you are, that someone has looked at you and made you feel that you are enough. She was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, small and tired and completely real. We left you something, she said. Something that is not a record or a document or a piece of history. Something personal. Something we made because we wanted you to know that we thought about you, the ones who would come after us, and we wanted you to have something from us that was made with care. She leaned forward slightly. Look under the floor tiles near the back wall. The ones marked with a sun. You will know them when you see them. She sat back. Thank you for coming, she said. Thank you for caring enough to look. It means more than you will ever know. She reached toward the camera. The screen went dark. The vault was so quiet that Vorik could hear her own heartbeat. She stood in front of the dark screen for a long time. Long enough for the soft ambient light of the vault to feel different, warmer, somehow. Fuller. Like the room itself had changed slightly in the last hour, had become something more than a sealed metal box on a frozen moon. It was Doss who finally spoke. His voice came out rough and low, like it had been sitting and used for too long. The floor tiles, he said. Near the back wall. Vorik nodded. She turned around. And together, without another word between them, the crew of the Pale Drift walked to the back of the vault to find what the humans had left them. The floor tiles near the back wall looked the same as all the others. That was the first thing. They were the same dark metal, the same size, the same smooth surface as every other tile in the vault. If Sarah had not told them exactly where to look, they would have walked over these tiles 100 times and never given them a second thought. They were designed to be invisible. Designed to be found only by someone who had been told to look. Vorik crouched down and moved her light slowly across the floor. There, near the very base of the back wall, in the corner where the shadows were deepest, a faint marking. Not carved deep. Not painted or engraved in any dramatic way. Just a light pressing of lines into the metal surface, so shallow that you could run your finger over it and almost not feel it at all. A circle. With lines coming out from it in all directions. A sun. Vorik pressed her palm flat against the tile. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft sound. A low, clean tone, like a single note played on an instrument none of them had ever heard. And the tile shifted. Just slightly, a millimeter of movement, a whisper of mechanical parts waking up after a very long sleep. A thin line of light appeared around the edges of 3 tiles arranged in a small cluster, and then, slowly and carefully, those 3 tiles lifted together as one piece and slid sideways into the floor. Underneath was a compartment. And inside the compartment was a container. It was about the size of a large travel case, rectangular, made of the same dark metal as everything else in the vault, with a handle on top and a sealed edge running all the way around the middle. The surface was warm. Not hot, just warm. The comfortable, steady warmth of something that has been carefully maintained at exactly the right temperature for a very long time. Doss reached down before anyone else moved and lifted it out. It was not heavy. He set it gently on the floor and stepped back. They all looked at it. Taith wiped her face with the back of her hand. Her eyes were still red, but she was steady now, the kind of steady that comes after you have cried what needed to be cried and there is nothing left to do but keep going. Should we open it? She asked. Nobody answered right away. Because the honest answer was that they all wanted to and none of them wanted to at the same time. Whatever was inside this container was the last thing the humans had prepared for them. The last thing. After this there would be no more surprises, no more recordings, no more voices from 10,000 years ago reaching across the silence to find them. Opening it meant the end of something. But Vorik crouched down in front of the container and found the seal along the middle edge and pressed it. The seal released with a soft breath of air, warm air, carrying a smell that none of them could identify and all of them felt immediately, in some deep and wordless part of themselves, was something close to extraordinary. It was green and living and old all at the same time. Like soil after rain. Like something growing in good light. The container opened. Inside, packed in neat careful rows, were small sealed packets. Hundreds of them. Each one clear, so you could see what was inside. And inside each one, small, dry, impossibly ordinary, were seeds. Just seeds. Different shapes and sizes and colors. Some were tiny and round and dark brown. Some were long and pale and flat. Some were rough and ridged and some were smooth as polished stone. Each packet had a small label, and the labels were written in 2 languages side by side, human script on one line and galactic standard on the next. Wheat. Lavender. Oak. Sunflower. Tomato. Basil. Cherry. Wildgrass. Clover. Pine. Names that meant nothing to any of them and somehow meant everything. Dawes picked up one of the packets and held it up to his light. Inside, 3 small seeds sat still and quiet. The label said, "Forget-me-not." He did not know what a forget-me-not was. He did not know what color it was or how tall it grew or what kind of soil it needed or whether it liked rain or dry weather or full sun or shade. He knew nothing about it at all. He held it like it was made of glass. Under the top layer of seed packets, there was one more thing. A small device, flat and rectangular, with a single button on its surface. No label. No instructions. Just the button, slightly raised, in the center of the device. Taith picked it up carefully. She looked at Vorik. Vorik nodded. Taith pressed the button. The device hummed once, a single gentle pulse, and then a hologram appeared above it. Not a document. Not a recording of Sarah or any adult human. Not history or data or carefully prepared information. A child. A small human child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with dark tangled hair and a gap where one of her front teeth used to be and the kind of bright, completely unguarded eyes that only very young things have, eyes that have not yet learned to be careful with the world. She was sitting cross-legged on a floor somewhere, a wooden floor, warm-colored and worn smooth, the kind of floor that has had many feet walk across it over many years. Behind her, out of focus, were bookshelves and a window with light coming through it. She looked at the camera and waved. Both hands. Enthusiastically, the way children wave, with their whole body involved in the motion. Then she said, and the translation came soft and immediate below the hologram. "Hi. My name is Lena. I am 8 years old." She paused, then added very seriously. "Almost 8.5, actually." Taith made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. It was something in between that had no name. Lena shifted on the floor and pulled one of the seed packets into her lap, a packet that matched the ones in the container exactly. "These are my seeds," she said. "I grew them in my garden with my grandma. She said if you plant them and give them water and enough light, they grow into something beautiful. She said that is true of most things." She looked at the seed packet in her small hands. "I picked my favorites to put in here. I do not know where you live or what your sky looks like. I do not know if you have dirt like ours or rain like ours or a sun that is the same color as ours." She looked back up. "But I thought, maybe you do. And if you do, maybe you could plant them. And when they grow, you could think of us. You could think of me and my grandma and our garden and how good it smelled in the summer when everything was growing. She was quiet for a moment. The light from the window behind her moved slightly as something outside passed in front of it, a cloud, maybe, or a bird. I hope you have summer where you are, she said. Summer is really good. You would like it. Then she smiled, wide and crooked and completely real. Goodbye, she said. I hope you are happy. I hope wherever you are, somebody loves you. She waved again. The hologram held for 3 more seconds, Lena frozen mid-wave, smiling her gap-toothed smile, and then it faded quietly and was gone. Nobody spoke. The vault was completely still. The warm air from the open container moved slowly through the room, carrying that smell, green and living and old, and the 5 researchers of the pale drift stood around a small flat device and a case full of seeds and did not say a single word. Dawes still had the forget-me-not packet in his hand. His head was bowed. Vorik stood straight and looked at the space where the hologram had been. Her face was composed. Her hands were still. But her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the vault's ambient light. Ohm turned away and walked slowly to the far wall and stood there for a while. Sev sat down on the floor. Just sat down, right where he was standing, and looked at his own hands. Tate held the small device against her chest like it was something she was afraid of dropping. Outside the vault, the gas giant turned on the horizon. The stars were where they had always been. The moon was cold and silent and indifferent. Inside, the seeds waited. Patient and quiet and full of everything they might become, if only someone would take them home and give them light and water and good soil. If only someone would remember. Then Vorik's scanner beeped. She did not reach for it immediately. She let it beep twice more before she moved, because she was not ready yet, and she knew it, and for once in 40 years of fieldwork she allowed herself that small honesty. Then she pulled the scanner from her belt and looked at the reading. Her eyes changed. Not the grief from before. Not the wonder. Something different. Something sharper and more urgent that moved through her like cold water. She read the numbers again to be sure. Then she looked up at the crew. There is another signal, she said. Her voice was very quiet and very controlled. 60 meters below where we are standing right now. Tate frowned. Another storage chamber? No, Vorik said. She turned the scanner screen so they could all see the reading. It is biological, she said. It is generating heat. It is organized and regular and it has a rhythm. She looked at each of them in turn. Something down there, she said, has a heartbeat. Nobody questioned it. That was the thing Vorik noticed later, when she had time to think back on that moment. Nobody said, "Are you sure?" Nobody said, "That cannot be right." Nobody asked her to check the scanner again or suggested that the reading might be a malfunction or an echo or some strange geological activity deep in the moon's rock. They just looked at the numbers. And then they looked at each other. And then Dawes walked to the equipment pack and pulled out the drill without a single word. That was the crew of the Pale Drift. 40 years of working in places like this had taught Vorik one important thing about choosing people: when the moment comes that is bigger than anything you prepared for, you want people around you who move toward it instead of away from it. Her crew moved toward it. Every time. The drill went through the vault floor at the back corner. The only section of floor that the scanner showed was not solid metal all the way down. There was a gap there, a deliberate gap, engineered into the structure of the vault itself. Someone had planned for this. Someone had built the vault knowing that whatever was below needed to be found from above, in exactly this way, by exactly the kind of people who would have made it this far. The ice beneath the vault floor was thinner than on the surface. The drill moved quickly. At 40 meters the bit broke through into open air and the temperature reading on the scanner jumped, warmer below than above, warmer than it had any right to be this deep in a frozen moon. At 50 meters, Tate got a bioscan reading. At 55 meters, the reading resolved into something clear and organized and completely unmistakable. 100 distinct biological signatures. All of them human. All of them alive. All of them asleep. They widened the hole and went down on ropes, one by one, into the chamber below. It was larger than the vault above. Much larger. The ceiling was high and the walls curved outward, and the whole space was lit by a soft blue light that came from long thin strips along the floor, a calm, steady glow that made everything look like the bottom of a very still and very clean ocean. And along the walls, in curved rows that went from the floor all the way up to the ceiling on both sides, were the pods. 100 of them. Each one about the size and shape of a long narrow door. Made of the same dark human metal, with a curved transparent panel in the upper half through which you could see, dimly, softly, like looking at something through very still water, a human face. Each pod had a small panel on the front. Numbers. Readings. Status indicators. And in the top corner of every single panel, glowing a steady and patient and extraordinary green, a light. Still on. Still running. Still keeping 100 human beings alive in the dark, 10,000 years after everyone else was gone. Vorik walked slowly along the rows. She walked the full length of the chamber without stopping, her light moving from pod to pod, face to face. Men and women of different ages and different appearances, all sleeping with the deep perfect stillness of people who had gone somewhere very far away and had trusted, completely, that someone would eventually come to bring them back. Their faces were calm. Not the blank calm of something that has stopped, the real calm of something that is simply waiting. Patient and quiet and full of everything they had not yet done and not yet said and not yet become. At the end of the row, Vorik stopped. She stood very still for a long time. Then she turned around and looked at her crew, at Doss with his drill still in his hand and Taith with her scanner pressed to her chest and Own standing straight and silent, and Sev, who was standing closer to the pods than anyone else, one hand raised slightly as if he had started to reach out and then stopped himself. She looked at all of them. Then she looked back at the pods. She found the main control panel on the far wall, a flat surface with rows of indicators and a single large screen that was already on, already displaying information in both human script and galactic standard. Someone had programmed it that way. Of course they had. They had thought of everything. The screen said. These are volunteers. 100 men and women who chose this freely. They asked only for one thing, a kind hand to wake them. If you are reading this, you are that hand. The process is simple. The pods know what to do. You only need to begin. Below the text, one large button. Outlined in the same faint sun symbol from the floor tiles above. Vorik looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at her crew one more time. Doss nodded. Taith nodded. Olm nodded. Sev had already turned back to the pods and was standing quietly beside the nearest one with his hand resting gently on the metal surface, not pushing, not pulling. Just there. Just present. A kind hand, exactly as asked. Vorik turned back to the panel. She pressed the button. The chamber changed. Not dramatically. Not with lights flashing or alarms sounding or any of the loud and urgent things that Vorik had half expected. It changed the way a morning changes, slowly and completely, and in a way that made everything before it feel like it had simply been waiting for this exact moment to arrive. The blue light along the floor shifted warmer. The hum of the pod systems deepened slightly, like breathing becoming slower and more deliberate. The numbers on each pod panel began to move, temperatures rising by small careful degrees, readings shifting and adjusting, the pods doing exactly what they had been built to do and doing it with a quiet precision that was almost impossible to watch without feeling something enormous and wordless moving through your chest. It took a long time. 40 minutes. Maybe more. The crew of the Pale Drift did not speak. They moved slowly through the chamber, one person beside each pod cluster, watching the panels and the faces behind the glass and the steady green lights that had waited 10,000 years for this night and were now, finally, doing what they had always been meant to do. Vorik stayed near the center of the chamber. She watched everything. The first sound was small. A breath. Just one breath, sharp and sudden and completely human, drawn in with the urgency of someone surfacing from very deep water. Then a pause. Then another breath, slower this time, finding its rhythm. The nearest pod to Vorik hissed softly as its seal released. The curved transparent panel fogged for a moment from the temperature difference. Then it cleared. The human inside opened their eyes. They were dark eyes, deep brown, slightly unfocused in the way of someone who has just come back from somewhere very far away. They moved slowly around the chamber, taking in the blue light and the curved walls and the faces looking back at them. They came to rest on Vorik. The human, a woman, middle-aged, with short dark hair and a small scar above her left eyebrow, looked at Vorik for a long moment. Her expression was not afraid. It was not confused or panicked or lost. It was the expression of someone who had made a very large decision a very long time ago and had simply been waiting to find out how it turned out. She took one more slow breath. And then she said, her voice rough and low and cracked from 10,000 years of silence, but clear, perfectly clear, in words that the translation in Vorik's earpiece carried soft and immediate and exact. Did we make it? Vorik could not speak for a moment. She stood in the blue light of a chamber on a frozen moon at the edge of a dead solar system, surrounded by the slow waking sounds of 100 human beings coming back to a universe that had spent 10,000 years believing they were gone. She thought of Sarah sitting quietly at her desk. She thought of Davin and his letter and his mother and the meal he wished he could eat one more time. She thought of 112 people going out in 14 small ships into the dark and never coming back. She thought of Lena and her garden and her gap-toothed smile and her seeds and her grandma and the summer she hoped they had. She thought of a species that had been soft and fragile and small and had spent every single day of their existence reaching forward anyway, toward the unknown, toward each other, toward whatever came next, with open hands and tired eyes and absolutely no intention of giving up. She felt something move through her that was bigger than any word she knew. Then she stepped forward. She stood directly in front of the pod. She looked at the human woman, this impossible, extraordinary, ordinary human woman who had gone to sleep in a dying world and woken up in a new one, and she said, in a voice that was steady and warm and completely certain. Yes. You made it. Around them, one by one, the other pods began to open. The chamber filled with the sounds of breathing, 100 people breathing together for the first time in 10,000 years, each breath small and simple and the most remarkable thing Vorik had ever heard in 40 years of finding things in the dark. Outside, the gas giant turned on the horizon. The stars were where they had always been. And in a frozen moon at the edge of a forgotten system, something that the universe had believed was finished turned out to be, as it had always been, as it had always insisted on being, not finished at all. Not even close.